Hey, what's up? Hope everyone's doing okay. So this is week 10, and the reading for this week was Deuteronomy 28 through Joshua 12, and we got it finished reading a little earlier today, and it's actually kind of, I always say exciting, but it's pretty exciting. I know there's mixed feelings because this is the end of Moses, or the end of Moses' life, and the end of Deuteronomy, and so this is kind of Moses summing up everything, and there is some pretty interesting things there at the ending there where Moses is talking about, or God is telling Moses, or was relaying the message pretty much where if the people will walk with God, then they'll walk with him. But if the people walk contrary to God, then God will walk contrary with them. And, he explains to them like all the blessings that he'll give them if they will be his people and to do the law and the words of the law. And if they don't, then they'll get all the curses. So it's like this pretty stark warning about the consequences of what happens if um, the people don't follow God's law, and God saying, or Moses relaying the message from God that the people will eventually um, walk contrary to him. And when they come into the land and their heart is fat, then they're going to forget where they got all these blessings from, and they'll turn away from God. But that if they turn back to God, that God will turn back to them. And it seems to be inevitable that the people will turn away from God. But what's the more interesting question, or what is up more for debate, is if the people will turn back to God. I think that maybe it's always inevitable that the people will turn away from God, but will they turn back to God? And I think that I guess that's the question, right? Is everybody sins, but do they understand their sin, and do they change their sin, and do they turn back to God, or do they keep walking contrary to Him? Do they see the error of their ways and change and grow from it, or do they continue down the path that they've gone down and not grow at all? And it's a difficult thing to do. And I think the most difficult thing is that every man is justified in his own eyes. So it's very possible that if you do walk contrary to God, you don't even know that you're walking contrary to Him. And so it's something in my own life that I try to struggle with, and I try to, or I do struggle with, I think sometimes, and I try to understand that I could be walking contrary to God and I wouldn't even really know it. And so I think it's kind of scary at times to understand that. And but seek and you'll find, and knock, the door will be open to you. So I try to seek the answers and to see if I am walking contrary, and that hopefully that will be enough for God to align me with where I need to be, and to prune me. And so that's kind of where I was at. So, but it was, and then obviously Joshua is like, man, Joshua is like probably, I think, the greatest general of all time, the greatest military general of all time. I know that in academia and history, he's overlooked completely. He's not even in the general. He's not even in a general. He's not even classified as a general, or even any of the general debates about who was a great leader, who was a great general. And Moses might have been the greatest leader of all time, and Joshua might have been the greatest general of all time. And some of the tactics that they talk about in the Bible, he employs or deploys, or whatever you want to say it. And I think some of these things were new at the time. And obviously, his conquests were absolute, and the people that he conquested were um, pretty great. So maybe they don't give him the generation, but God used him as the greatest general of all time, I feel. And to the what he conquered, and the amount that he conquered, and the kings that he conquered, and the land that he conquered, and the area that he conquered, and the things that he did, and his strategies, and what he was able to do was far and beyond any other general or any other person really in all of human history, at least that I'm aware of. Even though obviously academia gives credit to other generals, they don't even mention Joshua, but I do think that he was probably the greatest of all time. So on Monday, I had what my thing was for, like, because you have these chapters, and the main idea for Monday was covenant and oath with the children of Israel, and that's like I was talking about, like, walk contrary to God. God's going to walk contrary to them, but if they walk with God and they would do what His law is, then God will take care of them and bless them. And to some, what degree is that today? And if you're a Christian, if you walk with God, are you going to have good things happen to you? And it's different. Back in the day, it was the people, but now it's individual, and you're an individual, and you're amidst, a lot of different bad things. And it seems to be that if you're good and you walk with God and you do what God wants you to, that doesn't by any stretch of the imagination guarantee a prosperous life. If anything, it's going to almost guarantee a difficult life, and a lot of problems. And so that's the New Testament. That's different from the Old Testament and the New Testament. And so this is just a different way of living. But in the Old Testament, it's interesting, it's history. So it's very interesting to talk about. And so Tuesday was Joshua, and I thought about Joshua a lot on Tuesday. I tried to reflect on him and what he did and kind of his accomplishments. And then obviously when I read it today, because I have the days assigned for these different ideas, because I've read the Bible, and these 50 weeks and had this already mapped out. But then at the end of the week on Friday, after I think about them, then I read the actual book. I read the actual 14 pages or my Bible in these chapters, and then I think about, reflect on it in a different way. And then obviously I make the video, reflect on it in kind of like a conclusion of both my initial reflection and then my reading, and then my conclusion reflection about these main topics. And so it's a good way, I think, for me to learn, except for especially for right now. And I think is what God's put in my heart for me, to the direction that He wants me to go down. And so Joshua is, very interesting, and I didn't even really know who he was till maybe a few years ago. I didn't even think too much about him, and now he's definitely a person of interest, and then I look to and I think about often now. And so a lot of the people in the Bible that I never thought about really, now I kind of think about, and not necessarily if I look to them, but I think about their endeavors and the things that they've done and their struggles in a way that I didn't do before. And so it's almost like a new way of doing things. And so it's kind of exciting in a way, because it's, I'm 39 years old, and now I get to learn what's happened in history. Now I actually learn history instead of learning fakeality or lore that is taught in academia. I went to Eastern Washington, and I went to community college, and I just got my AA, but I was pretty close to getting my bachelor's. I was double majoring in psychology and addiction studies. So I spent a good 5 years in college, and I went through the school programming, K through 12, and I ended up getting my GED. I dropped out my junior year, and to go to my senior year, I went to alternative school. But I got my GED, and then I went to college, and I got my A, and then I tried to get my bachelor's degree, but I didn't finish. But at any rate, I spent a lot of time in college and a lot of time in schooling, and like most people. And so this history that you learn, this academia that you learn, is it's lore, nothing more. It's that's what I feel like, at least, and I don't think it's accurate. And I think it's just any part of it that is accurate is so changed from its originality that it's no longer can't even be recognized as what it was happened at that time, or what happened at that time. And so it's interesting that actually the only history you can really know is the history in your own life, and the history of the Bible. Every other thing in this world, at least that I've come across, seems to be deception and lies and deceit. And so, but if you read the Bible and you understand these things, and you're able to be in a part in your life where you realize these things actually truly happened as they said they happened, then you get a new way of looking at history, and it's pretty exciting. So then on Wednesday, I have water stood up when the Israelites crossed to the Promised Land. So this is pretty interesting, because obviously the well-known event of Moses parting the waters when the Jews left Egypt is well known. But this is lesser known, less talked about, is when the Jews entered the Promised Land. The water was divided as well, and they walked across, and they had the tabernacle, and the priests went into the water. And as soon as the priests put their sandals in the water was departed, and then they all walked over. And so everyone saw this. All the different people of the land, they were, at least they didn't know if all of them saw this, but other people of the land saw this, and they brought back word to each of their respected cities and their kings. And so they saw this, and this was obviously pretty terrifying to the inhabitants of the land that the Jews were going to conquer. And they all, 12 of the people from each tribe, collected stones, and they put the stones up in a way so that way that the Jews' children and future generations can have this as a memorial to remember what God did for them, and to understand that God fights their wars, what God can do. And so I would imagine, I don't know for sure, but I imagine there would be a lot of acts of supernatural events that happened. And I think that there's maybe one reason why supernatural events don't happen so much as they did back in the day, is because humans were able to handle them, because they were kind of used to them. Now, if a supernatural event happens, people can't really handle it. Even if you're a Christian, and a lot of these events, they're just kind of too much for your mind. You can't really process it correctly, and it's kind of alters your view of reality. And when you alter your view of reality, it's actually quite terrifying, and it hits you to the core and to the soul. And although as much as you would like to see it in a movie, you see in a movie that's something that you're used to, but when you see it in reality, a miracle that's not a part of what you see as a commonplace event in reality, or doesn't coincide or goes against what you think is a normal thing, or think is what's going to happen, it definitely affects you and terrifies you, and it almost seems to paralyze a lot of people. And so I think that a lot of supernatural events happened back then because people can handle it. Now supernatural events don't happen so much because the people can't handle it. It just becomes pain, And I think God doesn't want to give pain unless it's absolutely necessary. And then Thursday, Jericho, the wall, the Jews went around Jericho and they shouted and the walls fell down. Everyone knows this. Or this is, I think this is common. Not everyone knows this, but this is taught a lot. And, this is always a supernatural event, and you had to have a lot of faith to handle this. And the people that saw this and the people that were in the land, they still went against Joshua and the Jews after this event happened. But once again, this is a very interesting thing. But it's very interesting too, where it's, I don't know, it's sad and it's hard to understand, I think. And I think sometimes if you're not really if you're not in a place where you can handle this, or if it's not in a place where you can benefit from it, hearing these things with Jericho and then with these events that happen that are contrary to history or contrary to what your reality is, it's hard to believe them. And then when you hear about what the Jews did to the people that were there, they seem to kill every woman, man, and child, regardless of age. How to wrap that your mind around something like that, and how that could be morally okay, and how God could want that, it's really difficult. So I think that these events that don't coincide with movies, don't coincide with the events that you see in your life, and don't coincide with academia or history, this can damage your faith a lot. And then also not being able to understand why God would want the people to kill all the women, children, and men, and why didn't he just do it himself, and all these questions that arise. I think it can really damage people's faith. And so unless you're ready to handle these events and to hear them, I think that sometimes it does more damage than good. But maybe the seeds are planted so later on and you can't actually handle them. And so I think a lot of times these aren't taught in churches because they make it so that people don't want to return back to church the next week. And the pastors have to explain them. And I think for me, at least, everyone around me seems to be, knee deep in deception. And I don't think that they have the truth. And since they don't have the truth, it's hard for them to give out the truth, if not impossible. And so they can't really explain these things. And so they try to stay away from them as much as possible. And then, so at Jericho, and, for some reason I thought Jericho was the name. Like, who is Jericho in the Bible? And I was like, oh, Jericho's the city. And, that was kind of funny for me. And then I have Friday put the Lord God of Israel fought for Israel. And so it wasn't the Israelites that were, vanquished their enemies or that did well or prospered. It was God that was with them that allowed these or did these things for them, because, he was it was repeated a lot, or it's repeated a lot in the Bible, that they're stiff-necked people. And it's not because of their greatness that God does this for them, but because of God's greatness. And a lot of it is because of the sin in the land that they were going to, and the land spewed out the inhabitants of them. And so it wasn't because of their greatness, but it was because of other reasons why God did what he did, and God fought for them. And so I think it's just kind of a reflection. Sometimes when people get proud of it, it's, a lot of times, if not always, it's not us that are great, but God's great. And then if he puts us into a position, it might not necessarily be because we are a great fit for that position, but just because the other people in that position are just even worse than us. And so it's not that we're great, it's just that others are worse sometimes, I think. And so it is kind of a sad way of looking at it, but it is what it is. It's not that I do great, it's just others around me do even worse than I do. And so I don't know if that's the same as today, or if that was just something that happened in the Bible, or if it's less today or even more today than it used to be. But it's definitely a time in human history where that seems to be the reality. It's not so much that people are great, it's just that they were less bad than the other people. And so, I did this reading. Like I said, I think was it 10th week? Yeah, it was the 10th week. And so 10 week out of 50, so I guess that's what, 20%. 20% of the way done. And so just making progress, and I hope everyone's doing okay. And I changed the video, and so the lighting might be a little bit better, but hopefully I'm going to get better camera and a better sound quality, so it's not completely trash, and just keep trying to do better and put out better material out there. But I hope everyone's doing okay, and God bless and happy truth seeking.